What happens when two music legends clash over artistic legacy and one of them refuses to back down? You're about to witness one of the most explosive interviews in daytime television history. Before we dive into this jaw-dropping confrontation, make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below because this story will leave you speechless. The Jennifer Hudson show had been building anticipation for weeks. Morris Day, the flamboyant frontman of the time and Prince's former collaborator, was scheduled to discuss his new memoir and reflect on his decades in the music industry. What producers expected to be a smooth, nostalgic conversation quickly transformed into a verbal battlefield that would end with Morris Day storming off the set in front of a stunned studio audience. Jennifer Hudson, radiant in an emerald green blazer, welcomed Morris Day to the stage with her signature warm smile. The audience erupted in applause as Day strutted out wearing his trademark sunglasses and a perfectly tailored purple suit, his confidence radiating through every step. He settled into the plush interview chair, adjusting his collar with theatrical precision. "Morris Day, welcome to the show," Jennifer began, her voice carrying that distinctive blend of warmth and professionalism that had made her a beloved talk show host. "It's such an honor to have you here." "The pleasure is all mine, Jennifer," Morris replied, his voice smooth as silk with that familiar Minneapolis swagger. "Though, I have to say, that dress is almost as stunning as my entrance." The audience chuckled, and Jennifer laughed graciously. "Well, you certainly know how to make an entrance. You've been doing it for over 4 decades now." "Some would say I perfected it," Morris said, leaning back in his chair with a slight smirk. Jennifer nodded, consulting her notes. "Your new memoir, On Time, takes readers through your incredible journey from Minneapolis to becoming one of the most recognizable figures in funk and R&B. But there's obviously one relationship that shaped your career more than any other." Morris's posture shifted almost imperceptibly, his fingers drumming once against the armrest. "I imagine you're referring to Prince." "Exactly. You two had such a complex relationship, both collaborative and competitive. In the book, you write about some tensions that most fans never knew existed." "Well," Morris said, his tone becoming more measured, "Prince was brilliant, no question, but brilliance and ego often walk hand in hand, and sometimes that ego can overshadow the contributions of others." Jennifer leaned forward slightly. "Can you elaborate on that? Because from the outside, it seemed like you two were partners, especially during the time's early success." Morris removed his sunglasses for the first time, revealing sharp, calculating eyes. "Partners," he repeated, letting out a dry laugh. "Jennifer, let me tell you something about partnerships. A real partnership means equal credit, equal respect, equal recognition. What we had was more complicated than that." "In what way?" "Prince wrote most of the Time's music." "Yes, but he performed it under our name because his record label wouldn't let him release multiple albums simultaneously. Meanwhile, I'm up there performing, giving those songs life, creating the visual identity, the stage presence, the personality that made the Time unforgettable. But who gets remembered as the genius behind it all?" Jennifer's expression grew more serious. "But surely you understood the arrangement going in, and the success of the Time opened doors for your solo career." Morris's jaw tightened. "Open doors? Jennifer, I didn't need doors open for me. I was creating magic on that stage every single night. The question isn't whether doors were opened. It's whether proper credit was given where credit was due." The studio audience had grown noticeably quieter. Sensing the shift in energy, Jennifer maintained her professional composure, but there was a flicker of surprise in her eyes at the direction the conversation was taking. "Morris, I think most people would agree that both you and Prince were incredibly talented artists who brought different strengths to your collaborations." "Most people," Morris repeated, his voice rising slightly, "don't know the full story. They see the mythology, the legend, the carefully crafted narrative, but some of us live the reality behind all that." Jennifer paused, choosing her words carefully. "I want to be respectful here, especially since Prince isn't here to share his perspective. But from interviews he gave over the years, it seemed like he had tremendous respect for your talents and contributions." Morris stood up abruptly, causing Jennifer to startle slightly. He began pacing behind his chair, his movements sharp and deliberate. "Jennifer, with all due respect to you and your show, respect isn't something you claim to have for someone in interviews after the fact. Respect is something you demonstrate through your actions, through how you treat people when the cameras aren't rolling, through how you share credit and recognition. The camera operators were now tracking Morris's movements as he gestured emphatically. Jennifer remained seated, but her body language had shifted to alert attention. "Morris," she said gently, "I can hear the passion in your voice about this, and I understand that these relationships in the music industry can be complicated, but Prince spoke very highly of you in multiple interviews over the years. Did he now?" Morris stopped pacing and turned to face Jennifer directly. "Tell me, Jennifer, did he speak highly of me before or after I started setting the record straight about our working relationship?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Jennifer blinked, clearly not having expected such a pointed response. "I think from what I've read and researched, it was consistent throughout his career," she replied diplomatically. Morris let out another laugh, but this one was sharper, more bitter. "Consistent. That's an interesting choice of words." He walked back toward his chair, but didn't sit down. Instead, he gripped the back of it with both hands, his knuckles showing white through his dark skin. "Let me tell you about consistency, Jennifer. Consistently being introduced as Prince's protégé instead of as Morris Day, accomplished artist. Consistently having my contributions minimized in favor of the narrative that one person was the creative force behind everything. Consistently watching other people get credit for work that involved multiple talents." Jennifer's professional training was kicking in, trying to steer the conversation back to safer ground. "But Morris, your solo career and your work with the Time has been celebrated by fans and critics alike. Doesn't that recognition matter?" "Of course it matters." Morris shot back. "But recognition that comes with an asterisk isn't the same as recognition that stands on its own. When every article about the Time starts with Prince's side project or fronted by Morris Day, but created by Prince, that's not recognition of my artistry. That's recognition of my ability to perform someone else's vision." The studio had grown uncomfortably quiet. Even the audience members who had been excited to see Morris Day were now sitting in tense silence, unsure of how to react to the raw emotion pouring out of the performer they had come to see. Jennifer took a breath, clearly trying to process the intensity of Morris's response while maintaining her role as a professional interviewer. "I hear what you're saying," she said carefully, "and I think it's important for artists to have their contributions properly acknowledged. But I also think there's value in collaboration. And sometimes the most beautiful art comes from creative partnerships where different people bring different strengths." Morris's eyes flashed. "Creative partnerships," he repeated slowly. "Jennifer, let me ask you something. In your music career, when you collaborated with other artists, did you get equal billing, equal credit, equal respect?" "Well, that depends on the specific collaboration. But you got your name on the songs, right? Your face on the album covers, your voice recognized as distinctly yours." "Yes, of course." "Then you understand exactly what I'm talking about." Jennifer shifted in her chair, clearly feeling the weight of Morris's pointed question. The studio lights seemed to intensify the moment, casting sharp shadows across both of their faces as the tension reached a new level. "Maurice, I understand your point," Jennifer said, her voice still steady, but with a slight tremor that betrayed her growing discomfort. "But I think we might be comparing different situations. My collaborations were often what?" Maurice interrupted, stepping closer to where Jennifer sat. "Often more fair, often more equitable, often more respectful of your contribution as an artist." Jennifer Unk's eyes widened slightly. She had conducted hundreds of interviews, but this was rapidly moving beyond her comfort zone. "I think every collaboration has its own dynamics. Maurice, I wasn't trying to minimize your experience, weren't you, though?" Morris's voice had taken on a different quality now, sharper and more confrontational. "Because every time I try to explain how my contributions were diminished, you keep redirecting the conversation back to how grateful I should be for the opportunities." The audience was now completely silent, some members visibly uncomfortable with the direction of the interview. Jennifer Unk's production team could be seen in the wings, clearly uncertain about whether to intervene. "That wasn't my intention at all," Jennifer replied, her professional mask beginning to show cracks. "I'm trying to understand your perspective while also acknowledging the complexity of creative relationships." "The complexity," Maurice repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You know what's complex, Jennifer? Watching documentaries about your own career where your voice is barely heard. Reading articles about your own band where you're treated as a footnote. Having people approach you at events and say, "Oh, you're the guy who worked with Prince." As if that's the only thing that defines 4 decades of artistry. Jennifer took a deep breath, clearly trying to regain control of the interview. "Maurice, I can see this is something you feel very passionately about, and rightfully so. Your talent and contribution speak for themselves, but I'm wondering if holding on to this anger is serving you in a positive way." The question seemed to hit Morris like a physical blow. His face flushed, and for a moment he was speechless. When he finally spoke, his voice was dangerously quiet. "Holding on to anger," he said slowly. "Jennifer, are you seriously psychoanalyzing me right now?" "I'm not trying to psychoanalyze anyone," Jennifer replied quickly, realizing she had crossed a line. "I'm just asking if focusing on past grievances is helping you move forward creatively." Maurice laughed, but it was a harsh, bitter sound that made several audience members visibly flinch. "Past grievances. You know what, Jennifer? Let me tell you about past grievances." He began pacing again, his movements more agitated now. "I've spent the last 30 years trying to move forward creatively. I've released solo albums, toured internationally, collaborated with contemporary artists, built my own production company. But every single interview I do, every article written about me, every introduction I get on stage, it all comes back to the same narrative." Morris Day, former member of the Time, Prince's collaborator. Jennifer watched him pace, clearly struggling with how to respond. "But Maurice, that's part of your legacy. It's not the whole story, but it is a significant part of your story." "Legacy?" Morris spat. "You want to talk about legacy?" "My legacy is being reduced to a supporting character in someone else's story. My legacy is watching other people get credit for innovations that came from my creative input. My legacy is being told to be grateful for the privilege of having my own artistry overshadowed." The tension in the studio was now palpable. Jennifer's usual warm demeanor had been replaced by visible stress, and she kept glancing toward the wings where her producers were stationed. "Maurice," she said, her voice now carrying a hint of firmness, "I understand you're frustrated, but I think you're being unfair to the many people who do recognize and celebrate your individual talents." "Unfair?" Maurice stopped pacing and stared at her. "Jennifer, do you know what's unfair? Having your creative contributions minimized for decades and then being told you're being unfair when you finally speak up about it." Jennifer's composure was beginning to crack. "I'm not minimizing your contributions, Maurice. I'm trying to have a balanced conversation about your career and your experiences." "Balanced," Maurice repeated. "There's that word again. You know what would be balanced, Jennifer? Acknowledging that maybe, just maybe, the official narrative about certain collaborations isn't the complete truth. Acknowledging that some artists have been systematically overlooked while others have been systematically elevated." Jennifer's face flushed. "Morris, I think you're making this more confrontational than it needs to be. I invited you here to celebrate your memoir and your career achievements. Did you read the memoir, Jennifer?" Morris asked suddenly, his voice cutting through the studio like a blade. Jennifer hesitated for just a moment too long. "Of course, I read it. Well, I read excerpts and my team provided me with detailed summaries." "And you didn't read it," Morris said flatly. "You had your staff brief you on talking points." The studio fell into an uncomfortable silence. Jennifer Unk's face showed a mixture of embarrassment and rising irritation. "Maurice, that's how television production works," she said, her voice now carrying a defensive edge. "I have multiple shows to prepare for, multiple guests to research. My team provides comprehensive briefings that allow me to ask surface-level questions about topics you don't actually understand. Maurice finished to perpetuate the same tired narratives because you haven't taken the time to dig deeper into the real story." Jennifer's professional facade was now completely gone, replaced by genuine anger. "Excuse me. I've been nothing but respectful to you since you walked onto this stage. I've given you a platform to share your story, and instead of being gracious about that opportunity, you're attacking my preparation and my professionalism." "Your professionalism?" Morris's voice rose. "Jennifer, your professionalism consists of asking me softball questions designed to keep me in the comfortable box that people expect me to stay in. Your professionalism means never challenging the established narrative, never digging deep enough to uncover uncomfortable truths." Jennifer stood up now, her own anger finally breaking through. My professionalism means treating my guests with respect and courtesy, which is more than I can say for how you're treating me right now." The audience was now completely stunned, watching what had started as a friendly interview deteriorate into a full-blown argument between two accomplished performers. "Respect and courtesy," Morris said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Want to lecture me about respect? How about the respect of actually reading someone's book before interviewing them about it? How about the respect of asking substantive questions instead of recycled talking points? How about the respect of acknowledging that maybe your guest knows more about their own experiences than your research team does?" Jennifer's hands were now clenched at her sides. "Maurice, I think we need to take a break and reset this conversation." "Reset?" Maurice laughed harshly. "Jennifer, this conversation needed to be reset the moment you started telling me how I should feel about my own career experiences. This conversation needed to be reset when you decided to play therapist instead of journalist." The camera operators were capturing every moment of the heated exchange, unsure whether they should keep rolling or cut away. The audience sat in stunned silence, many looking toward the exits as if considering whether they should leave. "I was not playing therapist," Jennifer shot back, her voice now raised to match Morris's intensity. "I was trying to understand your perspective while also maintaining some objectivity about complex relationships in the music industry." "Objectivity," Maurice said with contempt. "Jennifer, there's nothing objective about consistently defaulting to the narrative that serves the most powerful person in the story. There's nothing objective about dismissing someone's lived experience because it tells it doesn't fit the comfortable mythology that people prefer." Jennifer was now visibly shaking with anger. "I have not dismissed your lived experience. I have been trying to have a thoughtful conversation about your career, and you have turned it into a personal attack on my integrity and professionalism." "Personal attack?" Morris's voice reached a new level of intensity. "Jennifer, everything about this interview has been a personal attack on my intelligence, my perspective, and my right to define my own narrative. The difference is that your attacks came wrapped in false politeness and professional courtesy." The studio had become a pressure cooker, ready to explode. Jennifer stood facing Maurice, both of them breathing heavily, their faces flushed with anger. The audience sat frozen, witnessing what would become one of the most infamous moments in daytime television history. "False politeness." Jennifer's voice cracked with indignation. "Maurice, I have been nothing but genuine in my approach to this interview. If you can't handle someone asking thoughtful questions about your career without turning it into a conspiracy theory about media narratives, then maybe the problem isn't with everyone else." Morris went completely still, his eyes narrowing as he stared at Jennifer. When he spoke, his voice was deadly calm, which somehow felt more threatening than his earlier outbursts. "Conspiracy theory," he repeated slowly. "Jennifer, did you just call my lived experience, my decades in this industry, my first-hand knowledge of how I've been treated, a conspiracy theory?" Jennifer realized immediately that she had gone too far, but her anger was now fully unleashed. "I called your interpretation of everyone else's motives a conspiracy theory. Yes, because that's what it sounds like when you assume that every interviewer, every journalist, every person who asks you about your collaborations is part of some systematic effort to diminish your contributions." The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Morris stared at her for a long moment, and then something in his expression shifted. The anger was still there, but now it was accompanied by something else, something colder. "You know what, Jennifer," he said, his voice now eerily calm. "You're absolutely right. I am seeing conspiracies where none exist. I'm imagining the systematic eraser of my contributions. I'm making up the decades of being introduced as someone's sidekick instead of as an artist in my own right." He began walking toward his chair, and for a moment, it seemed like he might sit back down and try to salvage the interview. Instead, he picked up his sunglasses from the armrest and slowly put them back on. "I'm imagining all of it," he continued, his voice gaining strength. "Just like I'm imagining that you invited me here not to discuss my memoir or my artistic journey, but to fit me into the same comfortable narrative that you and everyone else prefers. The narrative where I'm grateful, where I'm humble, where I don't challenge the accepted version of events." Jennifer watched him with growing alarm, sensing that something irreversible was about to happen. "Maurice, that's not what I was trying to do, isn't it?" Maurice adjusted his sunglasses and straightened his suit jacket with theatrical precision because from where I'm standing, this entire interview has been an exercise in keeping me in my assigned role. The charming sidekick who knows his place and doesn't rock the boat. The production team in the wings was now frantically gesturing, unclear whether they should cut to commercial or let the confrontation play out. The camera operators continued filming, capturing every moment of the escalating drama. "Maurice, please," Jennifer said, her anger now giving way to professional panic as she realized the interview was spiraling completely out of control. "Let's take a step back and try to have a productive conversation about your book and your music." "Productive?" Morris laughed, but it was a sound devoid of any warmth. "Jennifer, this conversation stopped being productive the moment you decided that your surface-level understanding of my career was more valid than my actual experience living it." He began walking toward the edge of the stage, and Jennifer followed him with her eyes, clearly uncertain about what to do next. "You want to know what's in my memoir?" Morris called out, his voice now projecting to the entire studio audience. "It's the truth about what happens when talented people get written out of their own stories. It's about what happens when the music industry decides that one narrative is more marketable than the complex reality of collaborative creativity." Jennifer took a step toward him. "Maurice, I understand you're passionate about this, but what?" Morris spun around to face her one final time. "But I should calm down. But I should be more reasonable. But I should accept that this is just how the industry works and stop making everyone uncomfortable with my inconvenient truth." The audience was now completely silent, some people holding their breath as they watched the confrontation reach its climax. "That's not what I was going to say," Jennifer replied, but her voice lacked conviction. "Yes, it was," Maurice said with absolute certainty. "Because that's what everyone says when an artist finally stops playing the game and starts telling the real story. Calm down. Be grateful. Don't bite the hand that fed you. Remember your place." He looked out at the audience, many of whom were staring at him with a mixture of fascination and horror. "You know what?" he announced to the entire studio. "I remember my place perfectly. My place is as Morris Day, accomplished artist, innovative performer, and creative force. Not as anyone's sidekick, not as anyone's protege, and certainly not as someone who needs to smile politely while being condescended to on national television." Jennifer made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "Maurice, nobody here is trying to condescend to you. We all respect your talent and your contributions to music." Morris removed his sunglasses again and looked directly into her eyes. "Jennifer, if you truly respected my talent and contributions, you would have read my book. You would have asked me substantive questions about my creative process, my artistic vision, my experiences as a band leader and solo artist. Instead, you asked me the same questions I've been answering for 30 years. And when I tried to give you honest answers that challenged your assumptions, you told me I was being unfair and suggested I was holding on to anger." The studio was so quiet that the hum of the air conditioning system was audible. Even the production crew had stopped moving. Everyone frozen in place as they witnessed the complete breakdown of what should have been a routine promotional interview. "I'm sorry if I didn't ask the right questions," Jennifer said, her voice now small and uncertain. "I was trying to create an engaging conversation for our viewers." "Engaging for who?" Maurice asked. "For viewers who want to see me stay in character as the entertaining former sidekick? For viewers who prefer their music history sanitized and simplified? Or for viewers who might actually be interested in hearing an artist speak honestly about his experiences, even when those experiences challenge comfortable assumptions?" He put his sunglasses back on and began walking toward the exit. Jennifer followed him desperately. "Maurice, please don't leave like this. We can start over. We can talk about whatever you want to talk about." Morris paused at the edge of the stage and turned back one final time. "Jennifer, starting over would require acknowledging that something went wrong in the first place. And based on this conversation, I don't think you're ready to do that." He looked out at the stunned audience. "I want to apologize to everyone who came here expecting a typical talk show interview, but sometimes the truth is more important than comfort. And sometimes an artist has to choose between being polite and being honest." Jennifer made one final plea. "Maurice, your fans are here. People who love your music and want to hear your story. My fans," Maurice said with a sad smile, "deserve better than watching me pretend to be grateful for being diminished. And they deserve to understand that sometimes the most respectful thing you can do is walk away from a conversation that isn't serving the truth." With that, Morris Day turned and walked off the stage, leaving Jennifer Hudson standing alone in front of a stunned studio audience. The cameras captured every moment as he disappeared into the wings. His exit as dramatic and commanding as any performance he had ever given. Jennifer stood frozen for several long seconds, clearly unsure of how to proceed. The audience began to murmur among themselves, some applauding Morris's exit, while others seemed confused and uncomfortable. Finally, Jennifer turned back to the cameras, her professional training kicking in despite the chaos that had just unfolded. "Well," she said, her voice shaky, but attempting to regain composure. "That was certainly an unexpected turn of events." The interview that was supposed to promote Morris Day's memoir had instead become a raw, unfiltered examination of artistic legacy, creative credit, and the price of speaking uncomfortable truths in an industry that often prefers comfortable myths. What did you think of Morris Day's dramatic exit? Was he justified in his frustration, or did he take things too far? And don't forget to subscribe for more behind-the-scenes stories that reveal the real drama happening in entertainment. Let me know in the comments. Do you think Morris Day was right to walk off, or should he have handled the situation differently?